This is the Bereaved Parents Club podcast. It's the club none of us want to be members of, but here we are. My name is Debbie and I'm a bereaved parent. This podcast is for all of us, to share and celebrate the stories of our children and offer support to each other. Each episode will explore topics that have relevance to us as we navigate the world as bereaved parents. Whether your loss was last week, last month, last year, or even last century, you are welcome here. And whether your child was a baby, a youngster, a teenager, an adult, or even a parent themselves, you are welcome here. Please be aware that each episode will deal with themes of death and loss. It's July the 3rd. It's National Bereaved Parents Day here in the UK. We thought this was a good occasion for us to really introduce ourselves and share our own stories and talk a little bit about how the podcast came about. Maybe chat a bit about what comes next for the Bereaved Parents Club. And by we, I mean me, Debbie Eniver, and my friend Tracy Edwards. So welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Debbie. I feel honoured to be sharing our boys, Dan and George. And as a bereaved mums, we're sharing our stories on National Bereaved Parents Day.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I thought what we would do is probably easiest if I start off telling about Dan, because my loss was earlier in our story. And then I thought I would talk about how I met you, and then we could take it from you and your story and tell us about George, if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of my story, for those of you who've listened to other episodes, you'll know that I wrote about this quite extensively in my memoir, Midowed. But for a sort of potted version of that, Dan and I were living together in Hillsborough, and we'd been out for a day in Manchester, and after a brief row about pizzas for tea, Dan had a little stomp off to KFC, but unfortunately he was knocked down and seriously injured crossing a road. A speeding driver had hit him, and I went down to look for him and found an empty stretch of road and police cars, and went up to the hospital where he'd been taken to, and it was quite clear quite early on that he had horrific brain injuries and wouldn't survive. He was transferred to Sheffield Children's Hospital, and he was declared dead the following day. Now, Dan became an organ donor, which has provided some kind of comfort in the aftermath of that story. And that is something that kind of has helped me. But immediately after I lost Dan, I also lost myself quite a bit, as I think we often do as bereaved parents. And I didn't really know who I was or what I was doing with myself. And as a single mum to Dan, I felt really quite adrift. But I also found it really hard to consider going to groups because I didn't think I could share my story, and I didn't know if I'd be able to listen to other people's stories or what I'd be able to offer. So I took up a little bit of counselling, which probably I did too early on in my journey, as it were, because it was sort of all right to talk about Dan, but I didn't really get a great deal from it. But as time passed, I thought, no, it would be good to go to a group. I'm sure it'll be helpful. And so I plucked up courage and I went along to my first and only Compassionate Friends group meeting, which was in Manchester. And I'm glad I did, because it proved to me that I'm not very good at group things, but also it was an opportunity to meet other people and to realise just how important those groups are for people. Because there was a lovely lady called Pauline running it, and she had a tough time on her hands that day because she had me, who was sitting there not knowing what to say, and two very newly bereaved parents who I couldn't believe had managed to find this kind of support or turn up or had the courage to be there. So it was really interesting from that point of view, and it was a very supportive experience, but I also knew that it wasn't for me in the long run. I felt too anxious in the run-up to going to groups. And so that's kind of where the idea of podcasts started. But at that meeting, I met Tracy. And Tracy was one of the people who'd been recently bereaved. And we'd made contact with each other on Instagram a little bit beforehand because I'd been blogging, and I think Tracy found me that way. But I'm going to hand over the story now to Tracy to kind of pick up, I guess, from her story in 2021.
Thank you, Debbie. I think when I met you at the Compassionate Friends meeting, I was only 9 weeks bereaved, so I was very, very early. In fact, I don't think that they allow people to be there now at 9 weeks. And I'd already found you on your Instagram page. And I think for me, you were a little glimmer of hope that I could survive the death of my son, George. Because at that time, it felt quite impossible because it was so early in my bereavement. But I'll talk about George now, if that's okay. Yeah. So George was and still is my absolute world. We're very close. And I think I had a difficult job, not only as his mum, but in the last couple of years as a single mum due to the separation from George's dad. And in a way as well, I think I was a carer and a support for George, who was dealing with depression, anxiety, and a burnout from the age of 15. And then due to COVID, all the support had been withdrawn. So I was so involved with him, juggling my working week and just juggling my job around him and his needs, really. But from a young age, George had so much energy. He was just like a little ever-ready bunny. He never crashed and he just kept going. We saw from a very young age that he was really creative. And as soon as he could hold a crayon before he could draw or write, he'd just make patterns. And he was like a little magpie because you would find that things would disappear. And then you would find that he'd reinvented them by tying them all together, hanging them through your shoes and just arranging things. But it always made us laugh and smile. And from a little boy, he would always try and make people laugh. He was silly. He was lots of fun. And he just had so much imagination. And when he was 7, we got a rescue cat called Toki. And George made him into Toki Super Cat. He drew comics and different characters and personas for Toki, and he appeared in every one of his school books, including his maths book, much to the frustration of his teachers and the amusement of his parents on Parents' Day. He loved to draw, and when he got older, he started using drawing apps, and it was always character comic figures that he created from his imagination. And then when he got older, he started using YouTube and developed a love of rap music. So he'd make all these memes that he'd share with his friends, videos. He did a rap once on a parody of Minecraft, which is a bit of a send-up, tongue-in-cheek. And he created lots of personas. We couldn't keep up with it. I mean, we didn't know half of them. But I'm going to share some because they're amusing. So one of them was George the horse. And then one of them was George isn't really a horse. And then his later one that all his friends knew him by was called Cheeky Banana Boy. I'm not sure what he was up to, but he kept getting banned from Twitter. But he was also interested in designing vinyl albums. He was really into his music. He started collecting vinyls, and he was really interested in independent artists that produced and also designed all their artwork. And he had aspirations of wanting to be a film producer. And he would order lots of random things, usually from very obscure people in America. So they sometimes take 6 to 12 months to turn up, and then he'd forgotten that he'd actually ordered them. And in fact, I had 7 packages arrive after George died. And the last one was in April 2024. But he was lovely and caring and sensitive, and he was always there for his friends. And he was there for me as well. And he was just a huge part of my life. And he had such a lovely smile. I see his face lit up, and it just always amused me because I could tell that he was going to laugh, and I just loved to hear him laugh as well. And it's still just such a shock that George died, and sadly, we'll never know why. And a couple of days before that happened, George woke me up early in the morning, and he'd been sick, and he was anxious about that. And I supported him, stayed up with him, and I just thought it's something he'd eaten or it was a bug. And then the following day, he slept on and off, and he was quite anxious about eating because he didn't want to be sick again. I just encouraged him to drink fluid so he didn't get dehydrated. And then that night, he was scared to go to sleep because he'd been sick the night before. So I actually put him in my bed and slept on the floor. But then he didn't settle, so he decided to go back into his own room. And then he woke up on the Thursday morning. And that day I tried to get him to eat food. He picked at things. He did drink lots of water, but he just said he didn't feel great. And I just put it down to the fact that because he was very anxious about being sick and he hadn't really eaten a lot and he had a lot of anxiety, that I was just, I suppose, so focused on his mental health because I was used to reasoning with him and trying to reassure him. And then in the evening, he said he didn't feel great. And then towards the end of the evening, before I went to bed, he asked me to make some soup. And then he asked me to come in at midnight, and he just said that he felt awful. And he just said his throat was sore. He did actually say his lungs felt a little bit funny, but because he was watching videos on his phone and he was so scared of catching COVID that I just thought he was just thinking that he had, that he'd got COVID. So I reassured him, I offered to do a test, and I just encouraged him to get some rest. I told him that he could shout or call me anytime during the night if he couldn't get to sleep. And I sent him a text to that as well, to tell him, to remind him of that as well, and just say that I loved him. And then I woke up on the Friday morning. I was a little bit late in getting up because I was so tired. I think I hadn't slept really for 48 hours. And because everything that I was dealing with, looking back, I know that I was running on empty and I was pretty much quite exhausted every day. But obviously I was just so used to just dealing with all the stress and trying to support George. So I got up, I started work. It got to 10 o'clock. I'd messaged him anyway. I used to use my phone message him as a way of contacting him because of his anxiety and the way he was. It was easier to text him because it was less intrusive, just to help manage dialogue that way during the day. And I went into his room on the 12th of November, 2021, around about 10 o'clock in the morning, and I found him dead in bed in a sleeping position, which obviously was, probably one of the worst moments in my life, as I know all the people who have lost a child can understand. So we didn't know why George had died. We then found out later on that he died of a heart attack, and that the antidepressant that he'd taken his antidepressant on both days, on the Wednesday and the Thursday, was down as a contributory factor to his death. But then, sadly, at the inquest, that was changed and it was put down to sudden adult cardiac death. And because neither Simon, George's dad, or myself have had any other children, we will never know the reason for this. But both of us still feel quite sure that just a combination of probably George's physical state with his depression and anxiety and the impact on his physical state, and him being sick and not eating and drinking as normal but taking his medication, had a contributory impact to George's death.
Well, that's so sad, Tracy. It really is. It's unbelievably sad. There's no conclusion there that's going to be satisfactory, is there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just something that obviously you go, and I know a lot of parents can understand this, you just go back over and over the events. And I think now, because I'm a bit further along, obviously I'm over 3.5 years now, it's still very hard because I'll never know. And obviously you go over all the things, and I don't go over it like I used to go over it, because I used to sort of, I suppose, try and analyse what I'd done wrong and how I could have saved him, and that I didn't pick up on it. And, you sort of, I suppose, as a parent, there's all that guilt and blame, so you tend to blame yourself. But yes, we have to just come to the terms with the fact that we know how he died, but we don't know why. And yeah, it's just something that we have to try and live with. And I didn't mention how old George was. So George died on the 12th of November, 2021. So he was 18, and it was just 2 weeks before his 19th birthday. Then we were in a spiral of events. So we had the death of our only child, his birthday, post-mortem, funeral, Christmas, and going into New Year, all within 7 weeks, which was, when I look back, was pretty tough. Tougher than, just all, it was just such a roller coaster. And being in shock as well during that period, obviously.
I mean, that's really intense. I mean, the firsts are hard, but you've not even had time to draw breath before you're hit with all these milestones and anniversaries and things that as well to kind of deal with. So that really does compound all the kind of disbelief and the difficulty of getting your head around it all. It really does compound it. You keep moving forward and it feels unbelievable that you're even managing to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah, you keep going, as I think a lot of people say, don't you? I mean, one thing for me is I still very much stay in the moment, stay in the present. But certainly in those early days, I mean, it's just a matter of getting through, isn't it? An hour by hour, day by day, week by week, and just, getting through.
Yeah. And we all find different ways of doing that. We know that. Thank you very much for sharing about George's story. I think that will touch a lot of people. I think in terms of what came next for me between Dan's death and kind of meeting you 9 weeks after George had died was that I'd been chronicling a lot of what I was going through as a way of trying to make sense of what had happened. So I found that writing things down helped me, mainly because I thought I was just going to forget what was happening. And I couldn't quite believe what was happening. So I felt I had to journal about it because it was all so unbelievable. And so for me, that's when I began to work on the book that became Midowed, because I'd got these very raw, experiences written down, and I wanted to capture that and share it, to say to people, this is unbelievable. Read this, it's unbelievable. But I also wanted to capture something of Dan as a memento for me and for the people who'd known him during his life. So, like George, Dan was a kind of bright and engaging kid, and that kind of battery-powered bunny is something I definitely recognise. We used to call him Tigger because he just bounced everywhere. And Dan was always head and shoulders taller than everybody else. He was one of the tall children. You could always find him in the photograph because he'd be the one poking out above everybody else. And he was really adventurous. And although he wasn't diagnosed until he was at secondary school, it was quite clear to me from early on that he had ADHD or something like it, because he had more energy than he knew what to do with. And frankly, more energy than I knew what to do with. So the pair of us, got through that with him bouncing and me being exhausted. But he brought so much fun and so much life and so much adventure and joy to everything because he was creative and bouncy and fun and up for adventure. And people who knew him remembered him. He was a once met, never forgotten kind of kid. Very friendly, very outgoing, very kind, be the first person to, even as a small boy, be the first person to kind of help somebody if they were in trouble, or to spot that somebody was kind of hanging around the fringes looking uncertain and go over and be like, oh, can I help? Or are you all right? Or do you want me to show you where to go? He was very much like that. And that kind of vivid spirit and kind of adventurous traveller who'd kind of gone off to Germany to visit his dad on his own when he was 11 and 12 years old, was just somebody that I had to recognise and I had to capture and try and remember, because I couldn't possibly let the memories of this boy go. So I wanted to combine both my memories and what had happened, because that way I felt that people would get to know Dan and then understand why his loss was so catastrophic for me. So that was kind of my way of coping and getting through that, which is a very isolating way of doing things because it leaves me sitting behind a computer and not really talking to anybody else. I know that you took a different approach and you did go along to the Compassionate Friends. And can you tell me a little bit more about activities with the Compassionate Friends? How did you find that?
Yeah, I think for me, particularly because I'm on my own as well, I just needed to find people. I suppose I needed to find people in a similar position to myself, to make sense of my situation, and also to help me understand that there was a way forward when it felt just so hopeless. So I went to the Compassionate Friends, to the group that you mentioned that Pauline runs, who's a lovely, lovely lady. And I still go now. So that's 3.5 years later. I also went to another group, which is quite different, in the fact that it's any grief. So, it's sort of split, I would say. 50% have lost a child of all different ages and, adult children. And 50% have lost partners, so, be it that they were married or that, it's just their partner. And then we have had 1 or 2 people been to the group that have lost like a brother or a sister. So that's quite a different group to Compassionate Friends. And that's called Meet and Grief, that's run by Nicola. So it's an independent group. And I get different things from different groups. So I have also been on the retreats from Compassionate Friends. I have been on the early bereavement retreat, which I didn't go on in the first year. And I am glad I didn't do that. I didn't actually go on it till I was 2 years bereaved, because it depends on where you are, doesn't it, in your journey and what you feel you can cope with. But for me, I felt that it was probably good that I don't think I would have coped with the group scenarios, although it was, it's lovely to be with parents and to talk about your child, and there's some really positive and some lovely things that come out of the weekend, but also it can be quite hard to hear other people's stories, as you mentioned before, Debbie. And then when you're in such an environment where you're all sharing stories of early bereavement as well, and so it's very, very raw. I'm just glad that personally for myself that I went when I was 2 years bereaved, but I did get a lot out of it. And I think one of the things that I have got out of going to these retreats, and I went on the active grief retreat as well, that's run by the Good Grief Project. And I think that really helped me formulate how I wanted to honour and take George with me in everything that I do, because they come at it from a very much a creative perspective, and there's different workshops around that. But it just gave me, I'd already started doing it, and I felt that people thought I was a bit bonkers, but it just gave me the confidence. I thought, oh no, I don't really care really, because this is how I feel that I can carry on with George, not physically with me, but with me in my thoughts and actions. And so wherever I go and wherever I do, I just try to bring George with me. I don't plan it. I do have some things with me sometimes, like I've got locks in the past, stickers. I might just draw his name in the sand. So it is very much in that moment of what feels right, but I just look for ways of doing that. And I think that retreat gave me the confidence and inspired me in some ways of how I could carry on and live my life and include George's creativity, include his essence and what he was about.
Yeah. I mean, I also went on one of those retreats at a different time to you. And it was actually just a couple of weeks, I think, after I'd lost my dad, which was a couple of years after I'd lost my mum and a year after I'd lost Dan. So there'd been the kind of, grief on grief on grief for a few years. And actually, the thing that I valued most about it myself was just the opportunity to turn up and cry as much as I wanted to for a few days, as opposed to just being in a situation in a group where you might be together for an hour and a half or a couple of hours and you might be supporting each other. I was able to kind of turn up there and just kind of bawl my way through breakfast without anybody particularly batting an eyelid. I'd get a comforting hand on my shoulder and then, are you all right? But basically, it was good to be in an environment where no one was going to try and fix me or anything like that. They would just let me be with my grief in however it was. And it was lovely then to be taken through, like you say, different activities. And I can remember doing the fitness one where we got to punch the crap out of some beanbag or something. And I can remember just absolutely wellying that thing and really, really getting a lot out of that. So whatever you take out of these retreats, it can be different each time. And I think it meets whatever need you turn up with and which is quite an incredible feat, to offer something that can be so broad and help so many people in so many different ways just over a couple of days. So I think, we've both gained from attending the Good Grief Project's retreats in our different ways. And I would encourage anybody to kind of get in touch with them if you think, God, that's for me. Even if you think you can't afford it, get in touch with Jimmy and Jane and talk to them about your need.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, Debbie, that from the minute whether it's a Compassionate Friends retreat or the Good Grief Project, from the minute you walk through that door, you're looked after. So in such a caring and thoughtful way, from the food and the way that they feed you and just, the care. It's just it just feels like somebody's wrapped a big warm blanket around you and tucked you in.
It does. That's a really good way of putting it. And I think we mentioned food there, and the food, there's something extra nourishing about someone preparing this food for you with love. But that also kind of neatly segues me into talking to you about the book that you put together. Can you tell us a bit about what that is and how it came about and where people could get it from?
Yeah, so I wanted to give something back to the Compassionate Friends, because of what I'd got out of being, like I mentioned before, going to the groups and just the connections that I've made, which have become so important to me. And it was early on in the year, I think we're going back to 2023 now, aren't we? Yes, it was early on in the year. And I am a member of private Facebook group, and one of the mums had posted on there some pictures of roast potatoes, and she said that how much her son had loved these roast potatoes and how she hadn't felt able to make them since, but there was a family celebration that she was having to do, so she was going to make them for the first time since her son had died. And then what followed was the responses, really. So many other parents responded and said what food that they miss making for their son or daughter. And it was just really heartwarming to read them. And then it made me think there's so much love and emotion attached to food and the memories that it brings back. So I wanted to find a way of raising money for TCF. And just by combining this, and I went out and I asked parents if they would like to contribute a recipe for their son and daughter. So it could be something like the favourite food, or it could be a recipe that their son and daughter had made themselves. And I ended up with 52 recipes, and we personalised each page and dedicated it. So I had a photograph of the child, and it was dedicated to their loved one. And and you also helped me, Debbie, a lot, because you also proofread and helped me with the editing as well, with probably my grammatical poor English.
No, I think you did wonders, because people we all threw everything at you in completely different formats. So you've got everything from sort of handwritten stuff to photos of photos. And it really was a kind of a technical challenge, wasn't it, to get this into a format that flowed and worked well. And we had everything in different measurements, like a pinch of this versus 15 milliliters of that. So trying to kind of standardize some of those things. But that was great fun. It was a learning experience, and I was really pleased to be part of it, certainly, and get Dan's recipe for margarita pizza, because margarita pizzas are the only pizzas. So yeah, it was great. So can people still get a copy of this now?
I think there are still a few copies, not many had left, but there are a few on the TCF website, the Compassionate Friends website, in their book section. Yes. And I had Hebe, who was Cody's sister. She kindly designed the front cover, which was a lovely design, because I wanted to sort of have every child's name on the front cover of the book. And she came up with a lovely idea of doing like a bowl of noodles, and the names were wrapped around the noodles, which was just lovely.
Yeah, it is. It's beautifully put together, and there are some fantastic recipes in there as well. And it's a real nice mix of savoury and sweet, and there's some lovely little anecdotes in there too. So anything you do cook from it, you do feel like you're cooking with love and a bit extra. It's really nice. And you feel like you get to know people and their children too. And there's nothing nicer than sharing your story of your child and knowing that somebody else is enjoying that story too. So, yeah, it's a really lovely endeavour. And who knows, cooked with love too could be on the cards, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I have toyed with potentially at some point have a version 2, because there was quite a few parents that contacted me afterwards and said that they wish that they had participated. I think one of the things as well was it was an opportunity for parents to share their child with their family in a way that was a way that they felt they could positively do. So I know I had one parent tell me they bought 10 copies and that everybody was going to get one for their Christmas present. And also, no matter how long ago their loss was, it brought their child back into the present moment with them. And I was honoured to sort of have been involved to do that for them.
It's a really lovely book. It's a really lovely way of honouring everybody. And so, yeah, I'm really pleased that you did it. And I do hope that there is a sequel in the making somewhere down the line, because I think it would be equally well received. So I guess that kind of brings us up to where the podcast came from, in that we'd both been creating books in one way or another, and we've both been exploring different things. And I just was at a point where I kind of wanted to give something back in some sort of way as well, but I didn't quite know what to do. And because I was sort of finding that groups weren't for me, retreat aside, on a kind of, week by week or month by month thing, groups were not for me. But also, I didn't just want to read things in a leaflet or a magazine. Again, they were fine, but it wasn't really connecting with me. But what I do enjoy are podcasts. I like the way that I can sort of just for half an hour, 40 minutes, an hour, lose myself in another world while I'm doing a different task, generally, walking the dog or something tedious and menial around the house, or even driving in the car, something like that. And I thought, well, if I feel like that, there's bound to be other people out there who also find that groups might be too much at that moment. They might also enjoy groups at different points, but it might just give people a way in to find out that they are not alone, to hear other people's stories and to kind of take from that what they need in that moment. And so my idea was to try and kind of speak to lots of different parents who've all got lots of different stories and bring lots of different experiences to share with other people, so that people can feel heard, feel less alone, and find things to resonate with, and also find out about more support. So, for example, we created a podcast about organ donation, and that would be useful for anybody who had also gone through an organ donation, organ recipient kind of thing. But that was my idea initially, before I'd got into the nitty gritty, was just, can I create a podcast? And I remember kind of us going out for, something to eat and a cup of tea in Bramwell at the pub and saying, I think I'd like to do this podcast, Tracy. Are you in? Would you help? Can you? I think it would be a good idea, but even if I could figure out the technical side of doing the podcast, it's all the other stuff that goes with it, setting up a website, with there being things like socials and kind of spreading the word and doing stuff. And you were like, yeah. So, and coincidentally, I was doing a bit of work at the time for an organisation that put me in touch with somebody called Lauren. And again, I was just sort of voicing this idea in I'm thinking of doing this podcast kind of thing. And she said, oh, well, I do communications, I'll help. And I was like, you're not a bereaved parent and I can't pay you. Are you sure you want to do this? And she's like, yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea. I'd love to be involved. So I didn't let her change her mind. And she also got brought into the mix. Tracy, do you want to sort of say anything at that point about kind of where we were at when we first started thinking about this?
Yeah, I'd just like to add as well. I mean, I think Lauren has been amazing as well in all the things that she's done for us. Like you say, she's not experienced what you and I have experienced, Debbie, but she's been so passionate about it from day one.
Yeah.
And it's just been brilliant to have her on board. For myself, I was so excited. I remember when you told me, I think I need projects.
Yeah.
I know I do work full time, but I just need things. And it was just, such a brilliant idea of yours, Debbie, and something that wasn't out there in the way that you've done it as well. And I think it's quite unique. Yeah, we've had the feedback from parents to say, like you said, Debbie, it makes people feel not alone, but also it just resonates and validates where they are. So we have a variety of different experiences and episodes, and I suppose you take different things out of episodes depending on your own circumstances, but it's just such a valuable resource and a valuable library, and it's now out there, sadly, for parents in the future who may need it.
In terms of the people that have contributed in the stories that they've told, they've got such value and they're so important. And I feel so honoured that people let us hold their stories and listen to them sharing this, worst thing ever, but they're willing to share it and allow other people to hear about it and like you say, feel like they can recognise themselves in it. And it's them for as long as anybody needs it. And I think some people will kind of come in and just listen to one or perhaps two that they feel are relevant to them. So the more broad episodes that we've created, such as, the newly bereaved and perhaps the phase 2 or year 2 session episodes that we did, which look more broadly at kind of dealing with milestones and early grief and next phase of grief. But then there are those people who might have experienced a loss by suicide, who might only want to listen to the episode that deals with that. So they might want to listen to Dave talking about his son George. Or there are those people who perhaps have had multiple losses, who might want to listen to Lindsay's story about her experience supporting her 2 children through a life that was affected by Batten's disease. So there are a whole variety of different things out there for people, and that was the idea of kind of setting it up and running with it. And last year, I had quite a lot of time to do that. I stopped working. I just ploughed all my time into doing that and putting together as many episodes as I could do with the support of you, running everything there in the background and listening to things and kind of proof listening to things to make sure that it all worked, and doing the website, and Lauren doing socials and communications, and kind of all working together. And I think we did an amazing job. We should all pat ourselves on the back for getting out sort of 18 episodes in the space of a year.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that, Debbie, that you did a wonderful job hosting in the way that you narrated them, just with such care. So thank you.
Oh, no, it's a real privilege. I feel very mindful every time I speak to another parent of the journey that they're about to go on talking to me. I'm acutely aware that time and distance doesn't stop the pain, especially when you're going back to revisit that wound. So yeah, it is a real privilege, and to every single person who's contributed so far, my heartfelt thanks, a million times over for sure. But that sort of brings us up to the present. We're here, it's National Bereaved Parents Day, it's the middle of the year, so I suppose we're thinking now about what we do next and how we do it. My time has become more restricted, a bit like Tracy with her I need a project. I too need projects, but I feel like I'm at a stage where I can move to do some other projects beyond the world of the Bereaved Parents Club. Not that I'm going anywhere, but I'm maybe stepping back and taking a bit more of a back seat on what might be happening next. Tracy, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many stories to share, isn't there, Debbie? And so many different experiences as well, which would benefit other people to hear them. So hopefully we can, providing some new episodes. And I think personally for myself, I'd love to talk to siblings. As we know, they're often the forgotten grievers, but particularly from younger adults, I think it would be really useful to everybody to sort of get their take on how they cope with the loss of their brother and their sister. So hopefully we can look to find some younger adults to share their experiences as well.
I know I was very keen to ensure that we particularly reach out to people who might otherwise find it hard to find support, or more difficult to find local groups that might meet their needs. So particularly if they're from what we might consider to be marginalised communities or underrepresented communities, or where there's sort of intersectionality, so where you might find that there are people who are from the LGBTQ community but are also from the Black community, or from people who are disabled or neurodiverse and who perhaps don't feel that the mainstream groups quite cater for them, even though they say that they're inclusive, and they probably would be inclusive. But if you don't feel that that's right for you, and if you don't see yourself represented in those groups, then I think podcasts and us trying to find ways that people can connect with each other is another sort of facet of what we can do as a Bereaved Parents Club, or an area that we can explore more, so that we're trying to make sure that people who would be without support can get some. I know that we've got people, friends of yours, who are living in, the wilds of Scotland, or have lived, in remote communities where they're unlikely to find local groups or accessible groups around them, for example, and finding a kind of community through the Bereaved Parents Club, or at least feeling like they're being heard, and their stories are being represented. I think that's quite an important role that we can take as well. Whether we'll achieve everything we would like to achieve is another matter.
Yeah,
but I think we've kind of got some good ambitions for what we'd like to do. So, Tracy, I think we've kind of talked quite a bit about ourselves today, and I'd like to think that people will understand us and our motivations, and most importantly, they've got to hear about George and about Dan. And I think also that we want to say a big thank you to everybody who has contributed over the last year to kind of making the Bereaved Parents Club podcast happen, to everybody who has listened, and to everybody who has been able to share what we've done, and to the Compassionate Friends particularly for their support in listing us on their website so that people can find us more easily as well. So yeah, it's from the bottom of my heart, it's a huge thank you to everybody who has taken part or listened, or contributed. So, and that goes out especially as well to you, Tracy, and to Lauren. Is there anything you want to add?
I'd like to add that the Bereaved Parents Club has meant so, a lot to me, myself. I think as a bereaved parent, it's such a valuable resource to have. I recently decided to re-listen to some of the episodes, because I think sometimes when you're hearing them for the first time, it may trigger a memory, a thought in your head, and you sort of go off in that tangent, and then you come back and you sort of I suppose you get lost in that moment. You come back and you realise you've missed 10 minutes. So as you've said, they're sort of timeless, really. And I think they're just such a valuable resource. And when you listen to them, I've listened to a couple recently for the second time, I probably got something out of them completely different from when I listened to them when they first were launched last year. So yes, yeah, definitely. They mean a lot to me, just even as a bereaved parent, as a resource myself.
And as well, what we've also done, because the website is there, we've put things on the episode listings, but there is also information on our website, because we've tried to back up each episode with further resources, and so that people can find out more about things locally, nationally, or anything that we've referred to. So again, I'd urge people to have a look. Even if you're not ready to go back and re-listen, although that's a lovely thing to do, if you simply think, oh, there was something really useful on that one about the libraries, there was some books that were mentioned, you can go and find the episode on the episode listing on our website, and there'll be lots of resources there too. Well, Tracy, one of the things that I always ask guests to do when they come on the podcast is to kind of lighten the mood at the end by trying to think of something fairly light-hearted that we're grateful for today. So have you had a chance to think of something that you're grateful for?
Yes, I have, Debbie. So I'm grateful for my cinema pass. I think it's been a bit of a lifesaver for me. I've had a cinema pass for over 2 years now, and I think the reason I got it originally was it made me feel close to George because he loved films. But it's become so much more than that. I feel like I'm at home when I go to the cinema. That might sound a bit strange, but I think it's a place that I can relax, I can be absorbed, And, if I'm having a tough day or I've had a crap day, I can just take myself off and, just completely get lost in what I'm watching. However, snacking at the cinema is not always helping my waistline. So I might need to start crunching on carrot sticks instead.
That's really noisy. People won't thank you for that. You stick to chocolate, Tracy. You know it's the right thing to do. That's really lovely. I think, what am I grateful for? Well, today, I'm grateful for my air fryer, because when I can't be bothered of thinking of what to cook for tea, which is quite frequently, honestly, what I found is a wonderful thing to do is to stick something inside a wrap, stick it in the air fryer for 5 minutes and have a hot something. So I absolutely love the fact that my tea took me all of about 6.5 minutes to create and eat tonight. So my air fryer, that's my thing. That's got nothing to do with anything other than the sort of speediness. It does remind me of Dan wanting a 4-slice toaster for Christmas, which I did indulge him in, so that he could do 2 bagels at once. So maybe it's a time efficient thing that I passed on to him, or that he influenced me for, I don't know, but air fryers, that's the thing to take away today.
That's brilliant. So maybe there's a recipe in that.
There might be. Yeah, there's lots. They all involve cheese. So thank you very much for that, Tracy. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. And hopefully we will be back in your ears soon with some new episodes. We will keep you posted on the socials. Please do follow us on Instagram and on Blue Sky and Facebook. I think that's right, isn't it, Tracy? That's where we are now.
Yes.
We said that.
Oh, and YouTube.
Oh, and YouTube.
And YouTube.
Yes. Okay. So do follow us on socials. If you can, possibly like and rate us on any apps that you're on. That's wonderful. And if you want to support the work that we do have a coffee thing. I don't know what you call it, donate thing, which could literally buy us a coffee. And that would be marvellous, because who doesn't love a coffee when they're doing a podcast? But thank you again for listening today. I want to send a big hug out to all of you bereaved parents that are listening today on National Bereaved Parents Day or afterwards. You are in our thoughts all the time, and we send you all our love.
This episode is dedicated to Debbie's son, Dan, and my son, George.